Hey, Roy here on my channel, Roy Reads Anything, talking about books that are old or strange or interesting or just weird. And this time, The Benson Murder Case, which was the first book to feature a detective called Philo Vance. So the books came out in the 1920s, they used to be super popular. I think there were about 12 books and a whole bunch of movies as well. So weird to me that I didn't really know about this guy. I just knew the name. Just thought, oh, they were some old whodunits. But this book showed up in Edgar's Resurrectionist Book Club as the brainchild of Sean D. Standfast, and I'm going to circle back to that at the end, and there's some stuff I want to say relating to Sean as well. But yes, the book, a great discovery, because in my mind, I've got a bit of a sense of sort of late 19th century detectives and a bit of a sense of hard-boiled detectives, the Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler kind of ones. But in between, I'm not so sort of aware of what detective fiction was like then. Occult detectives, yes, them I know, including from the 1920s, but for sort of, as it were, non-occult detectives, a bit of an undiscovered country, really. So really grateful to Sean for pointing some of us towards Philo Vance in this book. So author pseudonym is S.S. Van Dyne. Um, One thing I noticed, so basically, as is often the case, it's partly about the pleasure of the book is partly about reading the mystery of the book, and it's partly about the environment that happens in, and it's also about the protagonist. So in this case, you've got this guy, Philo Vance, who's a kind of intellectual aesthete. He's a wealthy American, sort of patron of the arts, with a laconic wit. So one thing about the book is it's unfailingly amusing throughout because of basically because of the way this character carries on. And he has a sort of a foil. His great friend and sort of feuding partner is the DA, and he stumbles into the detective business. Um, from his sort of elevated perspective, he knows who did it straight away, but he won't tell anybody until he's sort of come up with all the evidence so that they can be convicted. So yeah, I mean, one thing I noticed was the description of the character. So certainly for a series character or even for a standalone novel, when part of the thing is about following a particular protagonist, knowing what they look like, important. Authors invest time in that. Give us the details so we know what they look like. Um, Maybe, sometimes reading a long series, it's like, oh, here we go again. For the 61st time, George G. Gilman is telling us what Edge looks like. Um, in this case, I think the way the description is done, it's it's on a different level to what you normally get. So, first of all, we hear about him being um, the, a cynic, um, described as bored and supercilious, but highly conscious and penetrating spectator of life. He studied at Oxford. So, right, description. He was unusually good looking, although his mouth was ascetic and cruel, like the mouths on some of the Medici portraits. Okay, so we could look at Medici portraits and check out the mouths. But then, footnote, so this is not an added footnote for modern readers. They think these footnotes dotted throughout the book um, are the author giving us extra information. So we told he's like mouth like some of the Medici portraits. Footnote: I'm thinking particularly of Bronzino's portraits of Pietro de' Medici and Cosimo de' Medici in the National Gallery, and of Vasari's medallion portrait of Lorenzo de' Medici in the Vecchio Palazzo, Florence. Yeah, of course. Now we can summon those pictures up from the internet, which I will endeavour to do. Furthermore, I'm going to endeavour to use the famous Ken Burns special effect of the slight zoom to give add interest to the pictures. So here we go then. So looks like Medici portraits, Pietro de Medici, Cosimo de Medici, and Vasari's portrait of Lorenzo de Medici. Okay, moving on. Moreover, there was a slightly derisive hauteur in the lift of his eyebrows. Despite the aquiline severity of his lineaments, his face was highly sensitive. His forehead was full and sloping. It was the artist's rather than the scholar's brow. His cold grey eyes were widely spaced. His nose was straight and slender, and his chin narrow but prominent, with an unusually deep cleft. When I saw John Barrymore recently in Hamlet, I was somehow reminded of Vance, and once before, in a scene of Caesar and Cleopatra, played by Forbes Robertson, I received a similar impression. So, contemporary figures, again, we're getting, very, very precise images of what Philo Vance is supposed to look like. Another footnote, and this, believe me, goes into, this is like Olympic level protagonist description. Once, when Vance was suffering from sinusitis, he had an X-ray photograph of his head made, and the accompanying chart described him as a marked dolichocephalic and a disharmonious Nordic. So we have, it kind of means long-headed, really. Right. Long-headed, literally and figuratively. We're just getting going, though. It also contained the following data: cephalic index 75, nose leptorine with an index of 48, facial angle 85 degrees, vertical index 72, upper facial index 54, interpupillary width 67, chin masognathus with an index of 103. Finally, sella tursisa abnormally large. So the sella tursisa, I have discovered, is actually it's inside the skull. So we not only know what he looks like to the point where we could probably recreate his head.
Like they do with those historical recreations.
Yeah, when they say this is what primitive man looked like or something. Yeah. We actually know some of the things that are going on inside his head. So I thought that was rather good.
Yes. I suppose it was.
And we find out that his dress is always fashionable. We first meet him wearing a silk dressing gown, which is all sounds rather impressive, and eating breakfast. So that's yes, here we go. A Seurat silk dressing gown and grey suede slippers, with Vollard's book on Cézanne open across his knees. So again, like the pictures we could actually look at, the skulls we could actually go and X-ray. We can also read this actual book about Cézanne that's still in print, and we see him eating breakfast of strawberries and eggs Benedictine. And there's mention of coffee and cigarettes. So I suppose, speaking hypothetically, one could recreate and consume pretty much the same breakfast, assuming that eggs Benedictine is what we now call eggs Benedict.
Let's hope.
And we don't have to pour in some Benedictine liqueur.
Because that would be horrible.
Yeah, well, yeah, but a chap in a silk dressing gown could well have liqueur with his breakfast. Yeah. And at this point, getting to what I was going to talk about in the video, the DA comes in. "By all that's holy," he exclaimed, raising his hands in mock astonishment, New York's leading flâneur and art connoisseur is up and about." So, all of the above. He's also being described as a flâneur, which I think is an interesting description. as a sort of cultural figure. Although this book has a little glossary at the back, it doesn't give a gloss for Flâneur, but um, I like the description from Lauren Elkin's book Flâneurs of what a flâneur is, from the French verb flâner, a figure of masculine privilege and leisure, with time and money and no immediate responsibilities to claim his attention. The flâneur understands the city as few of its inhabitants do, for he has memorized it with his feet. Every corner, alleyway, and stairway has the ability to plunge him into reverie. What happened here? Who passed there? What does this place mean? The flâneur, attuned to the chords that vibrate through his city, knows without knowing. So, yes, so that's the kind of guy Philo Vance is. And you can sort of see how the flâneur and the detective there, they have some similarities, basically looking at stuff and knowing things about it. Edgar Allan Poe's Auguste Dupin, definitely a flâneur, is literally described as roaming around Paris with his mate, looking at stuff and knowing things about it. Arthur Machen's Dyson, I mentioned in a recent video, also of a similar ilk. You may be thinking, yes, it's privileged males of the olden days, which is partly the point of Lauren Elkin's excellent book, reclaiming the idea from a female perspective. But leave that aside for another time. Philo Vance, great fun. All the footnotes, it's excessive, isn't it? You know, no one could possibly be as cultured as and leisurely as Philo Vance and his chums, who would sort of, in the middle of their investigations, they have to go to concerts, galleries, have gorgeous meals, etc. Every paragraph involves lighting or putting out a cigarette. I think if you took out the mentions of smoking, the book would be about half as long. But these days they say it's bad for you. So yeah, but it gives, say what you like about smoking. It gives authors something to have the characters doing. There's a little bit of stage direction. But yes, I enjoyed it immensely. Recommend Philo Vance as a character to check out. Like I say, there's wit, there's the kind of ongoing. When's he just gonna tell us who did the crime? He keeps saying he already knows, and his psychological ideas and his sort of enviable lifestyle of roaming around, knowing more than anybody else and enjoying art, rather like our good selves.
Rather like them indeed, but less unbearable.
Perhaps less unbearable, yeah,
Less
yeah.
unbearable than ours.
So, like I say, this was a pick from Sean D. Standfast's Edgar's Resurrectionist Book Club, which is sadly going on hiatus for a little bit because Sean D. Standfast is having a bit of bother to do with having to leave his rented property and pack up all his books and having a move forced upon him during a time of chronic illness, which is like the worst time for it to happen. So, one thing is, would recommend checking out Sean's channel because it's excellent. And if you look at some recent videos, I'll put some links down below. You'll see there's ways to support Sean in this troublesome, vexing time. But as an example of why his channel is great, it's kind of literary archaeology, isn't it? It's signposting us towards things we probably wouldn't have thought to look at, and having a lot of fun along the way. So that is my video about Philo Vance and his elongated skull. Hope you enjoyed that. Back soon with something else.